I thought I would start by giving a brief summary of some of the, and Josh already mentioned some of the major issues we have had early in the season. And the summary starts in 2004, 2005, just because that's the season I started. And it's not because we didn't have problems before that. So, and that year was my first season here, and we had some, thank you. We had some issues with coledoxin and acutatum, and that's not the traditional fruit rot, but the what we call root necrosis or crown rot, where the acutatum actually gets into the roots. And in 2007, 2008, we had a major issue. You all probably remember that with Glosporiortis, mainly from plants coming from North Carolina nurseries, and that will be the picture at the bottom here. And then 2012-13 is when we had the major issue with plants coming from nurseries with virus. And that year we also had acutatum. And the past few years we have had some acutatum coming, but it seems like every year it's coming from a different nursery and the problem, and we never know what really is coming. So it's always been like a surprise element, and I think not only for you guys, not only for the growers, but also for us researchers. We start working with Glosporiortis and get some research going, and next year the problem is a different one, and then we start working with another one, and then next year the problem is a different one. So it's always been a surprise. And in all this case, I need to point it out that the plants, when they get out of the nurseries and get here, they look perfectly fine. You cannot tell their disease. But you plant them and the perfect environment that Florida is for diseases, and a few weeks later they start going down. So I think that's actually not only a surprise for us growers and researchers, but also a surprise for the nurseries, because I do believe when the nurseries calls us like, oh, the fields look beautiful and they look fine, I didn't see anything, and it's true, a lot of those diseases you can actually not really see at nursery. Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, if you don't mind. I mean, the nursery growers deal with the same problems you do. We have the same environmental conditions, maybe worse environmental conditions. When it's raining 12 inches in North Carolina, when they're trying to harvest berries, listen, they can't control that just as much as you can't control the weather here. We have the same tools to use. Hopefully by the end of the night, we'll realize that that's a problem. If there's 2 acromites in a year, that means they get 1 and we get 1. They don't get 2 and we get 2. That's part of the problem. We're overusing the chemistries, and really we're not following the label when we're doing so, because that's the same berry plant, just because it came out of Canada or North Carolina, as it is in Florida. Go ahead, Dr. Natalia.
Okay, so I just want to show the problem with the acutatum. We sometimes think of these as a fruit rot pathogen, and that's what it is. But when there's a lot of inoculum around at nurseries, eventually it can get into the roots and in the crown, and the plants look fine when they're digged at the nursery. But then we put here in Florida, and we put 2 weeks of overhead irrigation and the perfect temperature. So we just create the perfect environment for that fungus that is there to then cause infection and cause symptoms. So we end up with fields that look like these, so a lot of problems during establishment. And as far as fungicides we have for control, anthracnose, it's actually very limited if we think about it. It looks like a lot of different products there, and I'm sure you're all familiar with all of those. But when you look close, there's basically 3 different options, and one of them is Captain. It's been around for many, many years. And then there is a big group there that we call the strobilurin fungicides, and Abound is the oldest in that group. It's been around since early 2000s, and Cabru, Flint, Marivon, Pristine, Quid-Excel, and there's, I think there's even a few others that I didn't include, but the point here is that those are all they all have the same chemistry. They are all strobilurin fungicides, and we use these FRAC codes to classify fungicides by their mode of action, and they're all in the group 11. So when you're thinking about rotating fungicides, you need to rotate with fungicides that are from a different group. So, and we're limited ideally to 4 applications of fungicides from this group. So we basically have 3 groups and only 4 of each. And thinking about our season and how long our season is, it's really not a lot. So we've been monitoring this group of fungicides because resistance is been around for some other pathogens and some other crops for a while. But up until 2011-12, we were collecting isolates and everything seemed fine and everything seemed sensitive. When we had the issue in 2012-13, when plants were coming infected, we picked up some isolates that had resistance. It was very few, but it showed us that the resistance was emerging. And then from them up to now, every year we've been picking up more and more. At the beginning, it seemed to be linked to a few places and a few nurseries. Now, I think it's still linked to a few nurseries, but it's every year it's a little bit more and more. And with this group of fungicides, what's happened is that once you have resistance, it's not like it's going to be less effective. It's just not going to work at all. You might as well just spray water or not spend your money. It's just it either works or it doesn't work.
Dr. Natalia, I'd like to point out that so there's a group of growers in Louisiana. I don't know if Chris Ola made it here yet, but if he's here, he came down from Louisiana. There's about 500 acres of berries out there. And they're growing, I think they're still growing cams. They're growing camarosas. And they had a bad problem with accutatum out there. And they weren't sure what to do with it, so I hooked them up with Dr. Natalia, their local doctor with, I believe, LSU. And they sent us some isolates down, and they turned out to be resistant to the Strobe family. So it's not just Florida that has the problem. That's Louisiana. Dr. Natalia, I believe you flew out to California to meet with several nurseries out there as well.
Yeah. So actually, those first 3 seasons here, those samples were collected in Florida, from Florida. These 2015-16, there's actually a lot of samples that came from California, from the ones from Louisiana and South Carolina. So we're starting finding from this season, as an example, from 114 isolates we test, 69 were resistant. So it's still, like I said, not totally widespread, but it's a significant percentage of the isolates that are resistant. And from everything we have looked up to now, it's like from 170, 115 are resistant. So it's pretty significant. And when we break down to nurseries, we sample from 15 different nurseries. And the majority of the nurseries have resistance, but some only have resistant isolates. And that's everything that's in red. So each one, the A to O here will be a different nursery. And I'm not trying to point out fingers to anyone. That's why they're not named. But some only have resistance, like the A here, G, and some are still mixed, and some have a significant proportion of resistance. And there's only really 3, looking at everything up to now, that don't have any resistance at all. So this gives us a pretty good indication that, yeah, we have a problem, and like Josh said, we are spraying the same fungicides. The nurseries have the same problems. They're spraying the 4 times they're allowed. We're spraying 4 times they're allowed, but it's the same pathogen in the same plant. So we should really be looking as an integrated management instead of look as fruit growers and nurseries.
Dr. Natalia, would Roverall be a good option there? Because we're not allowed to use it once fruiting, but since it's a non-fruiting crop, that's something that could be...
Not for anthracnose. For botrytis, yes, not for anthracnose. It has no effect on anthracnose. And, yeah, I'll get there, but, yeah, not. Okay, now I just want to shift gears a little bit here to botrytis. And you all probably remember 2012 when we had a major outbreak during a few weeks in February of botrytis, that everybody was spraying everything they could think of, and we were still, like their fields, they were still throwing 80% of the fruit on the ground. And what it turned out that we found out about that time is that a lot of the fungicides that we had and were spraying and we thought were effective, we found out at that time that we had resistance to a lot of those. So when you look at the options, it actually looks like we have a few more options here that we have for anthracnose, and in fact we thought we do. But when you start looking close, again, we're limited to Captain and Tyrum, and those are really good products because the M and their classification, it means that they're multi-site fungicides. They act in different parts of that cell of the fungi. So it's much harder for the fungi to become resistant to Captain or Tyram, and that's why they've been around for so many years.
This is just a question, but so since strawberries, we get new plants in every year. So if this was a problem this year, if they corrected the measures in the nursery, would it change in 1 year and not have that resistant? Is that possible?
No, it really depends, because if they have one field that's infected, then they're planting a new field, new plants that are clean. And if the inoculant moves to the clean plants, that inoculant is the fungus that is on that plant that's resistant. So if the fungus is still around their environment and it infects the new plants, then it's coming to us with inoculant that's already resistant. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Chemical companies, you're in here. I need something for anthracnose for strawberries. So get your best guys working on it. We're struggling.
No. So and so looking at the options for botrytis, so we have the multi-site fungicides, and those are, like I said, it's more difficult to get resistant to those. And then we have the group of Elevate, which is Elevate, Captivate, Switch. And then at that time, that year, we found that we had very high levels of resistance to Scala. And whoever was spraying the Scala at that time was having a problem. And there was some different mixes, actually, with that group of fungicides that had issues as well. And then, and Pristine, which is pretty expensive, it was also, we also found a resistance, and it was not working. So some of the growers that were having issues were spraying Pristine. And now there is a new group of fungicides that are just being very recently, the last 2, 3, 4 years at most, being labeled for control of botrytis on strawberries. That's Mary Vaughan Fontellis, and just this past season, Kenja and Luna Tranquility, which will be available for the upcoming season. It's registered now, but it was not up to this season. All those fungicides, they're all on the same group. They're all group 7. So when you're thinking about rotation, this is one group, and ideally, I would not like to see more than 2 applications of those. The label, I think, allows for 4, but I think 2 would be even better. And then we have Switch. And in the case of Switch, it's a mix of 2 groups. Group 9, same as the Scala, and that cyprogenil is not working anymore. What's doing the job here in Switch is the fludoxonil, this group 12. So it's basically the fludoxonil that controls the botrytis and not the cyprogenil.
So, Dr. Natalia, when you first came out with the Pristine resistance, I was in the field and I was seeing Pristine working that year. Is it possible that Pristine resistance started in the nurseries because we only was able to use it once or maybe twice for the whole entire year? It was not overused in Plant City.
Yeah, so we're now with the new project that we have with FSGA, and Natalia and I have been traveling, and we're trying to build a relationship with the nurseries and trying to learn what nurseries are doing. And I never really thought about Pristine as something that nurseries would be using, and that's because I don't think of botrytis as being a problem for nurseries. If they don't have any fruit, why would they have botrytis? Well, they don't have much botrytis, it's true, but they have, a lot of nurseries have problem with powder mildew. And turn out Pristine is quite good for powder mildew. So they're actually spraying, targeting powder mildew, and then, but then by the time we got the plants here, then we had a resistance issue because they had already sprayed. So it's what we call a non-target application. Their target was something else, but it's still select for resistant to botrytis. And the other thing is, when we talk about resistance, is not that all the population out there is resistance. We have to think of these as individuals, and just think of this room, a percentage of us will be resistant to certain antibiotics, and it's not like everybody is. But when it gets to levels like what we're finding with Pristine, so Pristine is 2 compounds, the boscalid and pyraclostrobin, were found in that 85% of the population that we collect was resistant. So it's very significant. So you might still get some control, but it's for what you're paying for is very limited. Thompson, it was another one that I actually was surprised at that time on how much it's still used, and it's still used for botrytis. And 95% of the population that we look at is resistant to toxins. So there's no much point except that it's inexpensive. Yeah, but if it's not doing anything, then why
botrytis, not doing anything on botrytis.
Yeah, this is all for botrytis. And then this is the parameter, the scala that I just mentioned. We had about 60% of resistance, and we're getting very limited control on the field. And with switch, we have to look at those individuals. So we have cyprodenyl, and cyprodenyl is same group as the scala, so we have about same level of resistance. The only product we did not find resistant at that time was fludeoxonil on switch. So it's basically that one product on switch that is doing the job. Now, when we did this is from back 2013. Now we have the new fungicides, the Fonteles, Merivon, and Kenja, and Luna, and we're collecting samples and we're being monitoring those as well. So what we started doing more recently is trying to figure out how much of that inoculant, that botrytis, is coming with the plants and how much is just coming from the environment. Botrytis is everywhere, we know that, but we know there's some coming with the plants. So I had one student that basically what we did is that we went to the coolers when you guys get the plants, we went to coolers and we got plants right after those boxes before they even went in the ground. And we incubate them in the lab trying to get the botrytis out of those plants. And at the X here, you have all the different nurseries we collect. And from the majority of those nurseries, we're able to collect a significant percentage of isolate. So there's only like one nursery that we couldn't get much. But bottom line is that, yeah, we're getting some of the inoculant that's coming with the plants. But and this was not really surprising to me. We knew that. Botrytis is everywhere and it's coming with the plants. What was surprising to me was this. When we started looking at resistance, those isolates that we collect from those plants that were not even in the field, we found pretty much the same scenario that we found when we collect the samples from the growers. We have about 80-90% of the isolates were resistant to scala. This is paramethanil, this is scala. Paraclostrobin boscalate, this is pristine. So about the same level of resistance we were finding when we collect samples here from fruit. We were finding there was a red coming with the plants. And then a little bit lower for phenhexamide. And those are the new products, fluopyramis luna, pentyopyrides fontelis, and this is the fludeoxonil on switch. So we're not finding much resistance on those yet. Those just came out in the market. But the bottom line here is that we'll need to be monitored from those, and we don't want to lose those. So we need to work with nurseries to really use those products only when we really need to. So bottom line, when we talk about integrated disease management, is that we need to, for one thing, not use those fungicides that are not effective. And I gave the example of Topsin, and that's like Josh pointed out for botrytis. There is no point on using Topsin for botrytis because you're not really reducing that population, and you're just allowing those resistant isolates to survive. So we need to know what still works so you can keep that population level down. And then we also need to start thinking about reducing the number of applications, especially of what we call the single-site fungicides. And those are the newer materials, the more expensive one, but they're also more prone to resistance development. So I think about, it's kind of a shame, but sometimes I feel like I'm here then giving a recommendation there at the bottom. That is the same recommendation that the plant pathologist here in my position 40 years ago was given to you guys. It was Charlie Howard back in the day. Wow. That talked about Captan and Tyram and chlorothalonil and so forth. And those products are actually quite good. They have higher residues, but they still work and they're not as prone to resistant development. So I see these as it should really be the basis of the program, and the other products should be really only integrated when you really need to. So works for powder mildew. It's not as good, I agree, with some of the newer materials, but it still provides you some good effect. Captain, pretty good for anthracnose. Thyram, quite good for botrytis. Chlorothalonil, also good for botrytis and anthracnose. We cannot use here, but nurseries can. Nurseries can use chlorothalonil, that's Bravo. So we should be going back to, that's silly to talk, go back to what we were doing before. I think it was better than we're doing today. So when we're talking about reducing the number of applications, I think many years ago, we don't really know, and we didn't really know, I like to think, when you're going to have disease. And most of the sprays we're doing preventive. You just spray every week trying to prevent what's going to happen in the future. And our season here is pretty long. We have five months. So I hope everybody in the room is familiar and is taking advantage of the Strawberry Advisory System. I think I finally have Josh convinced that it works, or I like to think that. But it monitors for right now botrytis and anthracnose, and we're working on trying to include powder mildew on it. But we have a few weather stations around the state, and basically when it's red like this, it means conditions are highly conducive for anthracnose and botrytis, and those are really the times you need to worry about. And that's when you need to spray the more expensive materials, the single-sign fungicides that are more effective. When everything is green, like here, it means that the risk for anthracnose and botrytis is really low. You can either not spray anything, or if you're nervous and you want to spray, this is the time to spray your protectant fungicides like Captain or Thyram, or even a biological fungicides that might not be as effective. But you could, our data has shown that you could actually skip those weeks and not spray anything. I have, and there are two things that we monitor in the system, and it's basically temperature and leaf wetness duration. And with the leaf wetness duration it's not the humidity, it's basically how long, when you come to your field in the morning, how long that plant is wet. If you see the plant is wet, it's wet, and then we calculate the temperature during that time. And then we send for whoever to sign up an alert, okay guys, this is the time to spray. I have presented this in many different places and other states, and I always have a great interest in growers in other places. Oh, what can I do to have this? This is so useful. So I got some funding from USDA to expand, but I'm going to skip this. And and now it's really cool to see that we are expanding, and we have now stations in South Carolina and Georgia, but the one I want to talk about today is North Carolina. I know some of the nurseries are in North Carolina, and this just happened this last year. The platform looks a little bit different than ours, and it's basically because of their weather stations network. But if you are a nursery in North Carolina, you could take advantage of the same thing our growers are using here, and the models that go behind the North Carolina system is exactly the same models that we use here in Florida, monitoring that leaf wetness and the temperature. And this big area here that's red, it means there is a high risk for disease. If it's yellow, it's moderate, and this big area here, there's low risk. So if you're a nursery grower in North Carolina and you don't know yet about these, you should be looking at this. In our grant, we now got some extra funding to expand this to nurseries in other locations. So I'm going to California next week, and California is probably going to be next. We're going to have some weather stations in California, nurseries that are going to be monitoring their conditions there, so they will be only spraying when they really need to. And ultimately, we would like to have some in Canada as well.
I do agree, and yes, you did finally convince me. I had to prove it myself. Actually, Russell Goodson, we were in your field, and it was a beautiful day. It should have been no botrytis. I always told her the farmers are their own weather advisory system. We know when it's going to rain and then it's not going to rain. And she went ahead with her research anyway, and this year it was 11 o'clock. It was a beautiful day. I would have never thought botrytis was forming in the fields. If we were driving and you were window truck farming that day, you would have missed it, and you would have had botrytis. The cool thing is what Dr. Natalia has shown is as long as you catch it 24 hours, 48 hours after that advisory goes off, it will protect it statistically as good as when you had it before. That's not what I was taught by you. I was taught that you had to get it on there beforehand to make a difference. That's not necessarily the case. We do not have to just make applications to make applications anymore. Thank you, Dr. Natalia, for thinking about this.
Yeah, and this is the one slide that I kind of skip, but this just gives an example of one of the years that I think the way to convince growers was really by doing trials at grower fields and where we had basically 2 treatments, 1 treatment. I was just like, okay, just spray as many times as you would like to, but in this other area, we're just going to spray when the system tells me there's a need. And those 4 farms here, you can see most of them, we spray about half, 16, 10, 15, 7, and the amount of disease is pretty much the same. So it doesn't mean that you're going to get a better control by looking at the system. It just means that you're just going to spray when you really need to. And in the years when there's more disease, you're not gonna, or conditions are more favorable, you might not save that as much. And here, this is a different season. You only reduce 2 applications, 13 to 11, and you had disease in both, about the same level in both. But those years, like was this past season, when you can cut about half, and that's how, when we talk about resistance management and reducing the number of fungicide applications, that's where I think this tribal advisory system can help you to know when exactly you need to do those applications. And I think there's only one here, and Josh already talked about screening materials for nursery, and I've been looking at a few things, and one of them, this that I had in the trials this year was fluazina. It's omega. I've been told there's no chance that we'll ever get a label for that for botrytis for our growers, because it has some issues with the fruit. But if maybe we could get a label for nurseries users, then nurseries could use that, and then we can use some different groups. We've been looking at some other crazy alternatives that are not chemical. We're looking at heat treatments where nurseries could treat the plants in a kind of a, we call the plant sauna with heat to kill pathogens. And we have pretty good preliminary data with anthracnose and botrytis. We've been looking at UV for powder mildew and a number of different things, so we don't need to rely on the chemicals as much in the future.